Hello, viewers. I am currently at a village bazaar near Kashgar. Today is April 10th, 2024, a very special day because today is the first day of the Iranian calendar, a local festival known as Nowruz. So in the beginning, this holiday was celebrated strictly by the Iranian people, but over the course of 3,000 years, this holiday became extremely important for not just the Iranian people, but a lot of Central Asian peoples, including the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Nowruz literally means the new day, the first day, the new beginning. This is the day when people, visit family, friends, do some cleanings, celebrate. Normally this place is packed with people, but not today. It's amazing how cultures and religions mixed over here. As an Iranian holiday, 3,000 years old, is celebrated so seriously in Xinjiang. The Timurid Empire shattered almost immediately after the death of Timur. Most of Timurid influence in the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia was lost. Only the empire's core remained under Timurid control. However, each city was virtually independent of the central government, and there was no unity among the Timurid princes. The Golden Horde, on the other hand, finally met its end. Over time, it fractured into many pieces. One large chunk broke away in 1428, forming the Uzbek Khanate, founded by a man named Abu Hayr. Like most Golden Horde nobles, Abu Hayr also descended from Genghis' eldest son, Jochi. However, Jochi had a large family, with at least 14 sons. Many of them were the founding Khans of the Golden Horde. However, as the Golden Horde declined, most of these lineages died out fighting each other, leaving only the descendants of Jochi's fifth son, Shaybanid, a low-key figure in the family. It was Shaybanid and his descendants, the Shaybanids, who ensured the continuation of Jochi's line to the present time and dominated Central Asia for 2 centuries, well into the 17th century. And Abu Hayr was the founding father of this powerful dynasty. The same year Abu Hayr founded the Uzbek Khanate, the eastern Taklid Khan was killed by the Timurids. His 2 sons were then thrust into the spotlight. The elder, Yunus, was just 12 years old, while the younger, Isenbuch II, was merely a child. Despite their youth, the brothers were drawn into a deadly swirl of power struggles. The eastern Taklid Khanate quickly fractured into 2 factions, one supporting Yunus and the other Isen. With the backing of local warlords, Isen's faction emerged victorious. Defeated, Yunus and his faction sought refuge with the Timurids, who not only welcomed the exiled prince, but also sent him to Persia to study. As the 2 brothers embarked on different paths, Abu Hayr's ambitions were rapidly reshaping the steppe. Within 2 decades, the Uzbek Khanate had become the most powerful Khanate of its time. By 1446, Abu Hayr expanded into Transoxiana and relocated his capital to Sinak, threatening the very existence of the Timurid Empire, which was already mired in chaos. In March 1447, just months after the Uzbeks moved their capital, the 4th Timurid emir died. Over the next 4 years, the Timurid Empire would see the brutal deaths of 3 emirs. In 1449, the 5th emir was killed by his son, the 6th emir, who was himself murdered only 6 months later. By 1450, with the 7th emir in power, the empire was near collapse. Amid this turmoil, a new contender emerged, the second son of the 6th son of Timur's 3rd son, Abu Sa'id Mirza. Determined to claim power, Abu Sa'id secured the support of the Bukhara nobles and the Uzbek Khan Abu Hayr. The seventh emir stood no chance against him and was killed in June 1451. As Abu Sa'id rose to prominence, the brothers of the Eastern Taklid Khanate grew up. The younger one, Yisin, followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a nomadic Khan. However, the elder one, Yunus, preferred a different life. He fell in love with Persia, becoming a scholar who enjoyed the comforts of city life. These two brothers had very little in common and likely never expected to cross paths again after decades of separation. Yet, they were destined to meet again. In the same year Abu Sa'id became the 8th Timurid emir, Yisin began raiding his empire. Looking for ways to weaken his neighbor, Abu Sa'id was reminded of Yunus. In 1456, he summoned Yunus and gave him an army to fight his brother. By this time, Yunus had been in exile for almost 3 decades. He was 40 years old and still couldn't find himself a wife. However, this special assignment from Abu Sa'id changed everything. 2 of the most powerful families in the region, one from Kashgar and the other from Badakhshan, quickly married their daughters to Yunus. These 2 marriages would produce 7 children, transforming Yunus from a powerless exiled prince into the most powerful patriarch the Seven Sons had ever seen. Despite Yunus' success in building alliances, he had this much experience in warfare. The guy had spent his life studying books, not battle. So when he tried to go to war with his brother, he was easily defeated. He made several more attempts in the following years but failed to make any substantial progress. His brother Yisin, on the other hand, made some substantial progress with another pair of brothers from the Uzbek Khanate. You see, as Abu Hayr grew older, his harsh leadership caused unrest among his followers, and things got even worse when the Oirats showed up. These Oirats were faster and meaner, pillaging the Uzbek Khanate ruthlessly. In 1457, Abu Hayr suffered a crushing defeat, severely damaging his reputation among the Uzbeks. Months later, 2 brothers, Janibek and Kiri, princes of the former Golden Horde, decided to leave the Uzbek Khanate, leading a migration of some 200,000 households. They sought refuge in the Eastern Taklid Khanate. Their followers began calling themselves Kazakhs, meaning free riders. Yisin welcomed the brothers with open arms, granted the Kazakhs land, and supported their opposition to Abu Hayr. This alliance between Yisin and the 2 brothers laid the foundation of the eventual formation of the Kazakh Khanate. In the mid-1460s, the Oirats attacked the Uzbeks once again. Seizing the opportunity, the Kazakhs officially declared independence from the Uzbek Khanate. In retaliation, Abu Hayr launched a campaign against the Kazakhs in 1468 but was outmatched. He, along many of his sons, was killed. 3 years later, the Uzbek Khanate collapsed. By the way, it's worth noting that the Uzbeks and Kazakhs mentioned here were not the same as the modern Uzbeks and Kazakhs. Back in the 15th century, they were essentially one people sharing the same ancestry and language. It was over the next few centuries that differences in culture, appearance, and language began to emerge, leading to the distinctions we see now. While Yisin was busy bonding with the Kazakhs in their fight for independence, Yunus was busy bonding with Abu Sa'id. The 2 got along so well that their families became closely intertwined. 3 of Yunus' daughters married Abu Sa'id's sons, and Yunus' eldest son married Abu Sa'id's granddaughter. These marriages not only made them in-laws 4 times over, but had a huge impact on the world. In 1462, Yisin passed away, giving Yunus his long-awaited opportunity to claim leadership. This time, he faced little resistance. Within 7 years, Yunus became the sole ruler of the Eastern Taklid Khanate, finally returning to his homeland after a 41-year exile. In contrast, his good friend and in-law, Abu Sa'id, was not as fortunate. The same year Yunus took control of the Eastern Taklid Khanate, Abu Sa'id was killed in Merv while invading Persia. Following his death, the Timurid Empire was divided among his sons. His eldest son, Sultan Ahmed, inherited Samarkand and Bukhara. The second son, Sultan Mahmud, took control of Badakhshan and Hisar. The third son, Ulugh II, received Kabul and Ghazni. And the youngest son, Umar II, was given Fergana. Notably, 3 of these 4 sons were Yunus, sons-in-law, and they did not get along. The year the Uzbek Khanate fell, a young man named Muhammad Shaybani turned 20. His grandfather was the first Uzbek Khan, and his father was the last Uzbek Khan. Witnessing the fall of his homeland, Shaybani vowed to restore the Uzbek glory. Shaybani had been at war with the Kazakhs since he was old enough to fight. However, despite occasional victories, the Kazakhs often defeated him with ease. In 1480, Shaybani suffered a major defeat. After this loss, he and his followers spent years in hiding, struggling to survive. Eventually, they found refuge at the court of the governor of Samarkand and Bukhara, Sultan Ahmed, the eldest son of Abu Sa'id and the eldest son-in-law of Yunus. By then, Yunus was nearly 70 years old and had outlived all his contemporaries. Tired and longing for peace, Yunus spent his remaining years with his daughters' families in the Timurid Empire and was especially close to his youngest son-in-law, Umar, the governor of Fergana. Both men shared scholarly interests and were like-minded in many ways. Yunus and his queen spent many winters there, and on Valentine's Day of 1483, their grandson was born, a boy named Babur. However, not all his sons-in-laws were like-minded. Quite the opposite, the conflicts between them often escalated into full-blown wars, and Yunus had to intervene constantly. Around 1484, a dispute over Tashkent erupted between Umar and Ahmed. To end the conflict, Yunus claimed Tashkent for himself and settled there until his death in 1487. After Yunus' passing, his 2 sons divided the eastern Taklid Khanate. Sultan Mahmud ruled the west from Tashkent, while Ahmad Alak ruled the east from Turpan. This change of power in Tashkent reignited the dispute. Umar tried to retake Tashkent, but was pushed back by Sultan Mahmud. A year later, Ahmed also launched an attack and brought a large army of 150,000 soldiers. Among them was Shaybani and his 3,000 Uzbek soldiers. The night before the battle, Shaybani sneaked into Mahmud's camp and struck a deal to betray his liege lord. The next day, as Ahmed's army crossed the river, it was ambushed and destroyed. In thanks to Shaybani, Mahmud rewarded him with the city of Turkestan in 1488. However, this turned out to be a fatal mistake, as the Kazakhs were livid. They protested that Mahmud should never have given the Uzbeks such an important territory so close to the Kazakh lands. This decision ruptured the friendly relations between the 2 khanates, eventually leading to a war in which Mahmud suffered a devastating defeat. Seeing Mahmud weakened, Shaybani betrayed him. Mahmud summoned his brother from Turpan to help him. Together they fought Shaybani across the region but lost everything. Ahmad Alak died on his way home in 1504, and 4 years later, on the bank of Sidi Darya near Khujand, Mahmud was beheaded by Shaybani. With both leaders dead, the eastern Taklid Khanate collapsed. The Timurid Empire was also in a quagmire. Within the span of 8 months, from June 1494 to January 1495, the 3 most powerful Timurid princes, Umar, Sultan Ahmed, and Sultan Mahmud, died one by one. Sensing an opportunity, Shaybani expanded his power. In 1500, he signed a peace treaty with the Kazakhs, freeing himself from the northern threat. A year later, he took Bukhara and founded the Khanate of Bukhara. Shaybani then swept across Central Asia with lightning speed. By 1507, he captured the southern capital of Herat and ended the Timurid Empire. So nearly 4 decades after the death of the first Uzbek Khan Apaq Khoja, his grandson achieved what seemed impossible. He ended both the Eastern Taklid Khanate and the Timurid Empire, restored the Uzbek glory, founded his own Khanate, and officially established the Shaybanid dynasty. The Shaybanis would rule Bukhara until 1598 and Khiva until 1687, overseeing the golden age of the Uzbeks. But for Shaybani himself, it was still a little too early to celebrate. One final enemy remained. His nemesis, the Kazakhs. It turned out the peace treaty signed in 1500 had also greatly benefited the Kazakhs. Free from the Uzbek threat in the south, the Kazakhs expanded rapidly. By the time Shaybani toppled the Timurid Empire in 1507, the Kazakhs had become the most formidable force on the steppe. Shaybani, however, broke the peace with the Kazakhs, believing that he was ready for another round. And he couldn't have been more wrong. Because despite the Uzbek successes in Transoxiana, in reality, the Kazakhs were still far superior to the Uzbeks in war. Much like his grandfather Apaq Khoja, Shaybani's winning streak was also ended by them. In 1510, the Kazakhs shattered the Uzbeks once again, forcing Shaybani to retreat to Merv. While waiting for his main army to rescue him, death arrived first. The Iranian Shah of the newly founded Safavid Empire, Ismail I, heard about Shaybani's defeat and came to Merv with an army. Ismail beheaded Shaybani and had his skull turned into a drinking cup. Before he met his end, Shaybani had killed most of the Timurid and Taklid princes within his realm, except for one pair of cousins, the Timurid prince Babur and the Taklid prince Said. Babur was the maternal grandson of Yunus, while Said was his paternal grandson. With only 4 years between them, the two were very close. As Shaybani's era ended, the journeys of these two cousins were just beginning. After a 6-hour train ride from Tashkent, I have arrived in one of the largest cities in eastern Uzbekistan, and perhaps the purest Uzbek city, Andijan. The train ride from Tashkent was quite spectacular. The landscape changed dramatically. It transitioned from a hot semi-desert terrain suddenly to a fairyland with rivers, lakes, and endless mountains. Because the train didn't just take me to eastern Uzbekistan, it brought me to the one and only Fergana Valley, the most populous and most fertile lands in Central Asia, and the birthplace of countless legends, conquerors, tensions, rebellions, and of course, tragedies. Honestly, haven't seen this many shared taxis or minivans, parking together side by side, double parking and double car parking on top of each other like this before. It's just, I think, at least 300 minivans like this, going to different places in the valley, serving this 8 million population here. So you can find a lot of the soda stand by the streets. Cost 2,000 to get 1 cup of this pinda. Very good. So this is the place I've been coming for food lately. They have a really good chai, good environment, lovely ladies, and most important, it's quite cheap. So, can't beat this. That's actually part of the reason why I want to do a show in Central Asia. Meat is good. All this whole plate, 10,000 song, which is 78 cents. Unreal. Welcome to Fergana Valley. Cheers. The valley's most famous figure is perhaps this guy right here. Born in 1483, a great-great-great-grandson of Emir Timur, he was the founder of the Mughal Empire, Babur. You can find his statue, paintings all over the city, and this is just one of them. Babur was born to the ruler of Fergana. One summer day in 1494, when Babur was only 11 years old, his father Umar fell to his death from the dovecote. Overnight, Babur became the lord of Fergana. From day one, he was surrounded by enemies both inside and outside his court. His uncles wanted to take Fergana for themselves, sending armies to dethrone him, while nobles within the court favored his brother and conspired against him. Yet, as with every successful man, there is often an equally, if not more successful woman behind him, be that a mom, a daughter, a wife, or in the case of Babur, a grandma. She was the widow of Yunus, Aysan Dulat Begum. An 11-year-old boy and his frail grandma might not seem like the ideal team to play the Game of Thrones. But then the history they live in is really a history of exceptions. And this seemingly unlikely combination turned out to be the only Timur line that survived the Shaybanid onslaught, ultimately changing the course of Indian history. Grandma Aysan was a wise woman who had weathered many hardships. Under her guidance, Babur quickly secured his position in the court, and just months after his father's death, both uncles who sought to dethrone him died. Suddenly, the tables turned. Fergana was no longer the most vulnerable region, as major cities like Samarkand and Bukhara all descended into chaos. The young king seized the opportunity, shifting from a defensive stance to an offensive one. In 1497, at just 14 years old, Babur captured Samarkand. However, while he was away, a rebellion in Fergana robbed him of his homeland. As he marched to recover Fergana, he lost Samarkand as well. In 1500, Babur recaptured Samarkand, but soon lost it to Shaybanid. Defeated, Babur sought refuge with his maternal uncles and met his 14-year-old cousin, Said, son of Ahmad Alak. The two quickly became friends and fought the Uzbeks side by side. However, despite their efforts, the war ended in disaster. Babur fled to the hills south of Fergana with a small band of followers and resigned all hopes of recovering Fergana. Determined to try his luck elsewhere, Babur crossed the Hindu Kush in 1504, captured Kabul, and finally settled down. Said, on the other hand, was less fortunate. Unlike Babur, who fled the scene, Said was left on the battlefield and captured. After escaping execution by the skin of his teeth, he found out that his father had died and his brother had banned him from returning to Turpan. Having nowhere else to go, Said spent some years with Uncle Mahmud until Shaybanid killed his uncle in 1508. Desperate for refuge and a place to reorganize, the homeless Said turned to his cousin for help and traveled to Kabul. By then, Babur had been running Kabul for 4 years. He welcomed Said and gave him a home. While the cousins were in Kabul, the news of Shaybanid's death arrived. The Iranian Shah sent Babur Shaybanid's skull cap and partnered with him. The Kazakh Khan Kazim, who had married Babur's aunt, also joined forces with him to fight the Uzbeks. Bit by bit, things began turning around for Babur. With the help of the Iranians and the Kazakhs, Babur launched a campaign against the Uzbeks and recaptured some lost territories. However, his attempts to take Samarkand and Bukhara were repelled. Babur returned to Kabul in 1514, disappointed, and spent the next 11 years consolidating his power. The same year, Babur had returned to Kabul and paused his campaigns. Said's campaigns were just beginning. Leaving Kabul with his supporters, he raised a small army of 5,000 soldiers in the Fergana Valley and marched east from Andijan in May 1514. Very quickly, he captured Kashgar and Yarkand from the local warlords, establishing the Yarkand Khanate. Soon, other cities in the Tarim Basin submitted to him, recognizing Said as their ruler and honoring him as Sultan Said Khan. Even the mountainous regions of Kashmir and Bulor became dependencies of the Yarkand Khanate, paid tributes and struck coins under his name. Hello viewers, another day, another city on the Silk Road. This is a city located on the southern rim of the Taklamakan Desert called Yarkand. This city is sitting on the fertile oasis fed by the Yarkand River. If you got here by car, you will find yourself completely surrounded by desert from all sides until you reach Yarkand. Back then, this was one of the busiest cities along the southern branch of the Silk Road and have been the political center of several khanates over the centuries. Here in the bazaar, you can't really hear anything. But it's quite an experience, I'd say. The bazaar in Yarkand. Dr. Jingwu is gonna show you how to operate on a sheep heat. Uyghur style Lakman. The authentic Uyghur unsweetened yogurt. Super. There's a lot of fun facts about me, and one of them is I'm really good at eating. And this is the Yarkand River. It flows quietly, softly, and steadily through the Taklamakan Desert. Cities and towns grew next to it. Over the years, they become larger and larger and attracting more travelers, merchants, and traders. And this river provides a lot of food, transportation to the locals, and it's been flowing like this for thousands of years. It is a legendary river. As his cousin consolidated power in the Yarkand Khanate, Babur finally resumed his conquests. In 1526, he captured Delhi and founded the Mughal Empire. For the rest of his life, Babur never returned to his birthplace, Andijan, or his lifelong obsession, Samarkand. However, Babur and his descendants brought his memories along with Turkic and Persian cultures into India, further Islamizing, Turkifying, and Persianizing the local population. Even today, many surviving Timur-style architecture monuments can be found in India. The most notable one is, without question, the marble mausoleum, the Taj Mahal. The relationship between the Yarkand Khanate and the Mughal Empire was generally good. There was only one major clash between them regarding the control of Badakhshan in the late 1520s. The two leaders eventually resolved the conflict, agreed to avoid war, and both withdrew. Shortly after the Badakhshan dispute, in the winter of 1530, Babur died in Agra, and 3 years later, Said died in Ladakh, closing their chapters in history. And this is where all the Khans of the Yarkand Khanate were buried. Right here, this is the first Khan of the Yarkand Khanate, Sultan Said Khan. And I think this is one of his wives, and those two were his children. By the 17th century, the Mughal Empire ruled most of India and remained influential until the mid-19th century. The Yarkand Khanate, on the other hand, ruled the Tarim Basin for the next 2 centuries, laying the foundation of modern Uyghur culture, which remained vibrant in southern Xinjiang today. Although there was no military cooperation between the Yarkand Khanate and the Mughal Empire, culturally and religiously there were many exchanges. And the most famous and enduring fruit of these exchanges was perhaps the spread of a very unique Sufi order, Naqshbandi. Check it out. Just found another Khoja Tabend. Yeah, like I said, this name it's a serious matter. Any man with this name, Khoja, was and still is considered important among the local population. Khoja, this whole road, this whole alley, it's named after some Khoja guy. Yeah. Here's an interesting fact about Bukhara. If you walk through the old town, you will notice that more than half of the street names include the word Khoja. You might wonder, what does Khoja mean? And why are there so many? Well, it is largely because Bukhara is the birthplace of the Naqshbandi Sufi order. Previously, we covered the basics of Sufism and its role in converting the Turkic populations. That discussion was more conceptual and lacked concrete examples. This time, let's dive deeper and explore some specifics. You see, Sufism differed from Orthodox Islam by emphasizing a direct personal connection with Allah through practice. Based on this principle, many Sufi orders were born, each focusing on different practices. For example, the Mevlevi order focuses on group dancing, the Kadili order on group chanting, and the Yasawi order on asceticism. However, one Sufi order stands out from the rest. It forbids the renunciation of society, group dancing, and chanting. Instead, it encourages active involvement in the secular world and engagement with society. This Sufi order is the one only Naqshbandi order. The Naqshbandi order was founded by Baha al-Din Naqshband, who was born in Bukhara in 1318. He believed that one's inner being should seek union with the Creator, while one's outer being engages with creation. From this idea, Naqshband developed a set of principles which can be found on their website naqshbandi.org. By the way, Naqshbandi is still the most popular Sufi order in our time, literally 6 centuries after it was founded. In essence, the Naqshbandi Sufi order encourages its followers to live in the present and actively engage with society. Speaking of societal engagement, what better way to engage with society than to change it? There isn't, is there? Very quickly, waves of Naqshbandi Sufis with political ambitions marched into the courts of rulers across the region. And guess what? Both the ruling and the intellectual classes loved them and actively promoted this Sufi order. They were like, wait, so I can be on the righteous path to Allah just by running the country, or doing my art? Fantastic, we need more of them. Within decades, the Naqshbandi order evolved from a Sufi order with a small following into a powerful social organization. Naqshbandi Sufis advised rulers, giving them new layers of legitimacy in exchange for political and monetary capital, and completely got out of control. You see, here's the thing about Sufism. It has a unique feature that allows Sufis to reinterpret Islam. This adaptability made them highly successful in indigenizing Islam. When new followers were confused about something, Sufis could always find a way to explain it. But Sufis, no matter how secret, are human. They need to eat, pay bills, support their families, and so on. So in addition to indigenizing Islam, the Sufis would often interpret Islam in ways that helped them amass power and wealth, posing a threat to the regimes. That's actually why most Muslim countries, whether Shia or Sunni, have been repressing Sufism. By the end of the 15th century, the Naqshbandi Sufis had controlled the collapsing Timurid Empire, adopting the Persian word Khoja into their titles. Since they had become such a major political force in the region, many streets and buildings were named after them. It's worth noting, however, that Khoja has taken on many meanings. In some regions it means scholar, in others it is a common last name, and elsewhere it refers to the descendant of a holy man. In this part of the world, however, Khoja became an honorific title for the Naqshbandi Sufis. The aforementioned Shaybanid, Babur, and Said all had many Naqshbandi Sufis in their courts. Remember the conflicts between Yunus' sons-in-laws? One of those conflicts between Umar and Ahmed was stopped by the third-generation Naqshbandi leader Khoja Akhlar. He was also the one who gave Babur his name. Such was their power. These Naqshbandi Sufis could literally start and stop wars, and the ruling class had no choice but to listen to them. As Bukhara became increasingly crowded, many Khojas moved to India to work for the Mughal emperors. The sixth emperor of the Mughal Empire, for example, was a staunch follower of the Naqshbandi order. He reversed the empire's policies of religious tolerance and tried to fully Islamize India. While Islam flourished under his reign, Hindus and Sikhs were harshly persecuted, leading to the conflicts that persist to this day. Many Khojas moved to the Tarim Basin to work for the Yarkand Khans. The two most notable branches were the Black Mountain and the White Mountain. These branches were descended from the legendary Naqshbandi Sufi master Ahmed Khazani, who had served both the Khanate of Bukhara, the Mughal Empire, and the Yarkand Khanate. Over the years, he resolved many conflicts between them and was highly respected across the region. In 1542, Khazani died in Samarkand. Before he died, he expressed a wish to bring the Naqshbandi order to the Tarim Basin and China proper. By then, many Sufis from various orders had already settled in the Yarkand Khanate. The second Yarkand Khan invited at least 3 prominent Sufi orders, one in Kucha, one in Kargilik, and one in Kashgar. The Khans were not stupid. They knew the Sufis were after power, but needed them for legitimacy and public support. So to stop one from getting too big, they brought many different Sufi orders to balance power. And of course, it backfired. After Khazani's death, his fourth son, Ishaq Wali, was invited to Yarkand, where he founded the Ishaqiya branch of the Naqshbandi order. The descendants and followers of Ishaq Wali established themselves in Yarkand and became known as the Karatagliks, the Black Mountain faction. Meanwhile, Khazani's eldest son, Ishan Kalan, founded the Ishqiya branch of Naqshbandi order. His descendants and followers also moved to the Tarim Basin, established themselves in Kashgar, and became known as the Apaq, the White Mountain faction. Despite coming from the same family, the brothers, their descendants, and their followers absolutely hated each other. Over the next 3 centuries until the mid-19th century, the rivalry between the Black and White Mountain Khojas led to the brutal deaths of countless Khojas, Huns, intellectuals, and tens of thousands of ordinary Muslims and non-Muslims. By the mid-17th century, the Black and White Mountain Khojas had reduced the Yarkand Khans to mere figureheads. Some Khans sided with the Black Mountain Khojas and were murdered by the White Mountain Khojas, while others sided with the White Mountain Khojas and were murdered by the Black Mountain Khojas. In the end, many fled their home, crossed Kashmir, and sought refuge in the Mughal Empire. The critical moment arrived during the 1670s, when the third-generation leader of the White Mountain faction, Apaq Khoja, lost the favor of the Yarkand Khan and was forced into exile. He spent a decade proselytizing in Gansu, Tibet, Kashmir, and back to Kashgar. This decade-long journey would have a massive impact on the history of East Asia. Apaq Khoja began his journey in his birthplace, Kumo, and from there he headed to Xining. Back in the 1670s, more than half of the city's population were Hui Muslims, descendants of the Central and West Asian Muslims who had come to China when the Silk Road was still open. They welcomed Apaq Khoja, and many adopted his White Mountain Naqshbandi order. Years later, based on Apaq Khoja's teachings, the first Hui Muslim Naqshbandi order, Hufia, was founded. Today, about 7% of the Hui Muslim population in China follow Hufia, so in a way, Khasane's wish of spreading Naqshbandi to China proper is indeed realized. After his time in Xining, Apaq Khoja entered Tibet, where he met the leader of Tibet, the 5th Dalai Lama, the most powerful Dalai Lama ever. It was during his reign that the Yellow School defeated the Red School and dominated Tibetan Buddhism. The 5th Dalai Lama was a big fan of sorcery and miracles. When he heard that Apaq Khoja was a famous miracle worker, he invited him to a competition. Honestly, if a time machine were ever invented, that match would be the first thing I'd like to watch. The White Mountain Naqshbandi Sufi master Apaq Khoja versus the supreme leader of the Yellow School Tibetan Buddhism, the 5th Dalai Lama. What an ultimate showdown between Buddhism and Islam. What could be more fascinating? While the details of the match are unknown, the result was that Apaq Khoja won. The Dalai Lama, flabbergasted, asked him, "Who are you? Where are you from? What do you want?" Apaq Khoja replied, "I'm a Khoja of the Muslim tribe. The people of Kashgar and Yarkand are my disciples and devotees. Recently, someone took the cities from me and drove me out. My request is that you help me restore my homeland to me." The 5th Dalai Lama was against the idea of sending a Tibetan force. However, he had many powerful friends among the Oirats, who had all embraced the Yellow School Tibetan Buddhism in the late 16th century under the influence of the 3rd Dalai Lama. Among all the Oirat chiefs, he was especially close to the Dzungar Khan, Garden, who had come to Tibet when he was only 7 years old and spent 2 decades studying Buddhism before returning home. The Dalai Lama loved him as a son and wrote him a letter asking Garden to deliver Yarkand and Kashgar to Apaq Khoja. Apaq Khoja left Tibet with the letter and gave it to Garden. Garden read the letter and loved the idea. He had recently captured Kumo and Turpan and always wanted to take the Tarim Basin. In 1680, Garden led a force of 120,000 through Aksu and Osh to attack Kashgar, destroying the Yarkand Khanate. He then placed Apaq Khoja in charge of the Uyghurs in exchange for an annual tribute. You know, among all the stories I read, heard, and researched, this one is by far the most fascinating. An exiled Islamic Sufi from the Tarim Basin went to Tibet to convince the Tibetan Lama to help him retake power. Then the Tibetan Lama convinced the Dzungar Khan in Tian Shan to help the exiled Islamic Sufi retake power. And now, under the tutelage of Buddhist nomads, Apaq Khoja, a Sufi figure, became the king of the Tarim Basin. For this reason, the Uyghur community, to this very day, still have conflicting views about Apaq Khoja. For the Uyghurs in Kashgar, Apaq Khoja is still considered a holy man. His mausoleum has become the primary burial site and a spiritual center. This is footage of his mausoleum from 100 years ago. You can see how popular this place once was. If you ever find yourself in Kashgar, be sure to visit.
So this was once where the local Muslims do their daily prayers. And now it's completely empty.
Also, here's a poem I found at the entrance. If you read Persian or know how to use AI, you should understand what the locals think of him. Basically, the holiest man out there, second only to the Prophet himself. But for the Uyghur intellectuals, Apaq Khoja was undoubtedly a traitor who sold the Yarkand Khanate and the entire Uyghur population to the Dzungars for his own ambitions. In addition, after coming to power, Apaq Khoja harshly persecuted the Black Mountain Khojas and their followers, burning many non-white mountain classics, including literature, poetry, songs, and scientific books from the Uyghur Golden Age. Some Uyghur scholars argue that Apaq Khoja single-handedly set back the development of the Uyghur civilization for at least 1 century. We live in a world that plays out like a zero-sum game. When there's a loser, there's a winner. As the Uyghurs declined, the Dzungars were on the rise. Today, 7 regions in the world are named Altai. The Altai Republic and Altai Krai in Russia, Altai District in Kazakhstan, Altai Prefecture in China, and Gobi Altai Province and 2 Altai districts in Mongolia. What ties them together is their proximity to the Altai Mountains, the Golden Mountains. While indeed famous for their rich gold mines, the Altai Mountains are also famous as the birthplace of one extremely unique nomadic group, the Oirats. If the Mongols can be seen as the curveball thrown at the medieval civilizations, then the Oirats should be seen as the curveball thrown at the Mongols. For most of history, the Oirats were known as the Western Mongols, but that wasn't entirely accurate. The Oirats were the wild cards, the black sheep, and the outliers that didn't quite fit in any distribution. Even the mighty Mongols had once lived in their shadow. From the 13th to the 18th century, for 500 years, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Pacific Ocean, everyone knew something about the formidable Oirats. Let's quickly go over what they did in the past. The Oirats were first subjugated by the Mongols in 1207 and rose to fame during the Khwarezmian campaign. After Persia fell, the Oirats ruled Persia for a century. By the late 13th century, over 10,000 Oirats fled the conflict between the Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde, seeking refuge in the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. And Egypt itself, then the new center of the Islamic world, was ruled by an Oirat sultan from December 1294 to December 1296. After the Yuan Empire lost power in China in the late 14th century, the Oirats overthrew the Yuan royals and ruled over the Mongols. In 1449, the Oirats crossed the Great Wall, captured the Chinese emperor, and laid siege to Beijing. The Eastern Taklid Khans had no chance against them. Yunus' father alone was captured by the Oirats twice. From 1457 to 1461, they repeatedly shattered the Uzbeks, leading to the fall of the Uzbek Khanate and the rise of the Kazakh Khanate. Over time, they began to see themselves as a superior race, distinct from the Mongols. However, starting in the late 15th century, the Oirats began losing power and were pushed back to the Altai Mountains. One year, I interviewed some Oirat descendants in northern Xinjiang. There aren't many of them left, but you can still find some in the Altais. Some of them look more Turkic, while others look more Mongolic. It was an eye-opening experience. By the way, they spoke a language completely different from Mongolian, Kazakh, or Kyrgyz. As technology advanced, more and more sedentary civilizations got their hands on decent cannons and gunpowder, and the nomads began losing their edge in warfare. The best example of this was the rise of the Russians in the 16th century, who had been enslaved by the Mongols since the 13th century. Armed with better weapons, the Russians turned the tables. Yet, as I mentioned earlier, history is a history of exceptions. As the 17th century dawned, one nomadic group actually caught up with modernization and dominated Eurasia. The Oirats had returned. For 100 years, they were the biggest rivals of the two of the most powerful empires in human history, the Qing Empire and the Russian Empire. For Xinjiang, Tibet, and Outer Mongolia, the Oirats were the reason for their ultimate annexation into the Qing Empire. For the nomads in the Eurasian steppe, the Oirats were the reason for their ultimate annexation into the Russian Empire. In the early 17th century, 4 major Oirat tribes and 1 minor Oirat tribe emerged: the Cholos, Khoshuts, Turguts, Durbets, and the Khojas. After a long period of development, the pasture lands became crowded, and conflicts over territory began to rise. So in 1628, all the Oirat chiefs gathered and made a plan for the future. The plan was as follows. The Turguts would take some Khoshuts and Durbets and migrate westward in search of new pastures. Traversing the Kazakh steppe, they reached the lower Volga River in 1630. There, they established the Kalmyk Khanate, which would eventually evolve into the modern-day Republic of Kalmykia. Around the same time that the Kalmyks reached the Volga River, a civil war broke out in Tibet. The Red School Tibetan Buddhism was purging the Yellow School. In 1632, the Yellow School leaders went to the Oirats for help. The Khoshuts answered the call and ended the Tibetan Civil War in 1642. Their intervention helped the head of the Yellow School Tibetan Buddhism, the 5th Dalai Lama, become the supreme spiritual leader of Tibet. The Khoshuts then established the Khoshut Khanate and migrated to Tibet. Their descendants still live there and can be found in the Haixi Mongolian and Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. With most of the Turguts, Durbets, and Khoshuts gone, the only major Oirat tribe remaining was the Cholos. The Cholos and the remaining members of the other tribes formed the Dzungar Khanate in 1634. Together with the Kalmyk Khanate and Khoshut Khanate, these 3 Oirat Khanates forever changed the power structure of Eurasia. The Dzungars first rose to prominence by controlling the long-distance trade among Russia, Transoxiana, and China. This thriving trade fueled the rapid success of their new state. The Kazakhs were the first to feel the pressure. In the 1630s and 40s, the Kazakhs could still resist the Dzungars. But starting in the 1650s, the Dzungars became irresistible and pushed the Kazakhs further south. However, for the Dzungars, the Kazakhs were just one of many fronts. They were also fighting the Mongols in the east and the Russians in the north, and in the late 1670s, at the order of the 5th Dalai Lama, they also fought the Uyghurs in the Tarim Basin and put them under their rule, their first ever sedentary subjects. In addition to levying taxes on the Uyghurs, the Dzungars moved a group of Uyghurs as slave laborers from the Tarim Basin to the Dzungarian Basin to develop agriculture. This Uyghur community was named Talanchi, meaning farmer in Oirat. They were the first Turkic-speaking Muslim population in the steppe lands of Dzungaria, and their descendants would play an essential role during the turmoil in the 19th and 20th century. With a stable source of income and food, the Dzungar economy and industry developed rapidly. The Dzungarian Basin was rich in iron, copper, and silver mines, which the Dzungars used to produce weapons and shields. They bought advanced firearms and artillery from the Russians and cast them off with the help of European captives. Over time, the Dzungars were able to manufacture firearms indigenously and unleashed hell on their neighbors. The Kazakhs quickly lost half of their Khanate, while the Mongols lost all their lands and sought refuge in the Qing Empire, another unique power of the time. The Qing Empire, founded by the nomads from Manchuria, was about 10 years younger than the Dzungar Khanate and succeeded in running the most populous empire of the time. After careful consideration, the Manchu Emperor Kangxi decided to intervene. He lured the Dzungars near Beijing, defeated them, and annexed Outer Mongolia. Garden was overthrown and died in 1697. But instead of descending into chaos, the next Dzungar Khan, Tsewang-Lapten, did a terrific job. In the first 2 years of his reign, he preserved the trade route, avoided confrontation with the Manchus in the east, and focused on raiding the Kazakhs in the west. In 1701, a power struggle in the Kalmyk Khanate led 15,000 Kalmyk households to join the Dzungars. With more fighting men, the Dzungars launched even more attacks on the Kazakhs and reached the Sarasу River in central Kazakhstan. However, up to 1715, the people with whom the Dzungars clashed most severely were not the Kazakhs, but the Russians. After conquering most of Siberia, the Russians began moving south of Krasnoyarsk, provoking the Dzungar attacks. Both sides competed for the lucrative fur trade with the Siberian tribes. The Russians began building a line of fortresses at Krasnoyarsk, Kuznetsk, and Tomsk to guard their new territories, while the Dzungars were determined to destroy them. In 1710, the Dzungars destroyed the Russian fortress of Bakan, attacked Kuznetsk, and subjugated Berezbinsk. The Russians, however, didn't back down. To explore the gold mines in Dzungaria, Tsar Peter the Great sent an expedition to travel up the Irtysh River to build fortresses along it. In October 1715, the Russians reached Lake Yamish and built their first fortress. Angered by this advance, the Dzungars destroyed the fortress in February 1716, forcing the Russians to retreat and build the fortress of Omsk instead. After dealing with the Russians, the Dzungars turned their attention to Tibet. You see, following the death of the fifth Dalai Lama, a power vacuum emerged. The Tibetans wanted to retake power from the Hoshuts, and the Hoshuts wouldn't let go. This struggle drew the interest of both the Manchus and the Dzungars. Each saw themselves as the protector of the Yellow School Tibetan Buddhism, and both wanted to take Tibet for themselves. In the summer of 1717, 10,000 Dzungars took the deadly Karakorum route into Tibet. They traveled light and fast, bringing no provisions. When they suddenly showed up in Lhasa, everyone was shocked. The Hoshuts were devastated. Lhasa fell. The sixth Dalai Lama and the fifth Panchen Lama were captured, and the Dzungars raided all the way to Pomi. Shocked by this sudden turn of events, Emperor Kangxi quickly sent the northward army from Xining and the westward army from Kangding. However, when the northward army had just reached Nakchu in September 1718, the Dzungars ambushed and killed all of them. To avoid further damage, the westward army was caught back. This, however, wasn't the only Dzungar victory in 1718. A few months earlier, by the Ayagus River, 1,000 Dzungars defeated a large Kazakh army of 30,000. This defeat, coupled with the sudden death of Tolkhan, fractured the Kazakh Khanate into three hordes: the senior horde, the middle horde, and the junior horde. This marked the beginning of a period known as the Great Disaster for the Kazakhs. Meanwhile, the Russians continued their gold mining explorations and fortress construction. In 1719, they rebuilt the fortress at Yamish and built the fortress of Semipalatinsk. Semipalatinsk, or Semi, was the second city I visited in Kazakhstan. A lovely place with great weather and beautiful Soviet mosaics. I set up my camera, ready to film, when out of absolutely nowhere, this local gentleman strolls into my shot, clutching a newspaper that looks like it hasn't seen the light of day in at least 30 years, and starts talking to me in a language I cannot understand, not a word of it.
Октябрь событий 5 армий СНГ. Иностранная война. Годовщина была Белый дом, обстрел. Революция была, танки стреляли. Вот еще 5 армий СНГ.
Now, naturally, I start nodding like a complete idiot and uttering the few words I know in Russian, which, of course, only encourages him to continue. And oh, he did continue. Relentlessly. I was absolutely clueless.
Все хорошо.
Все, молодец, да? Кантемирская дивизия воевала. Кантемирская дивизия воевала с Белым домом.
Белый дом.
Русской. Революция.
A very fruitful conversation indeed. After what felt like 1,000 interruptions, the chap finally said something I can understand.
Синдзяба ваш убит в том году, в Японии его застрелил японский солдат. И Кеннеди ваш.
Кеннеди.
Да, Кеннеди. Вот это вот. Джо Байден.
Джо Байден, да.
Вот Джо Байден. Еще этот. Трамп. Это убили в том году, а этот с наган застрелили. Это ваши застрелили, иностранцы.
Хорошо. Все хорошо. Да. He's trying to convince me that a lot of assassinations
will occur.
Something that said, take a look at what happened.
Hello viewers, welcome to one of the least known and yet one of the most critical cities in the world, Semi. Semi was founded in 1718 as a Russian fortification against the Dzungars. It stands in the heartland of the Kazakh Middle Horde. So the Russians built a fort by the bank of the Irtysh River, near the site of an ancient Buddhist monastery where 7 buildings could be seen. Hence the name Semipalatinsk, which in Russian means the 7-chambered city. And very quickly, a small city was formed around the fort. And the river trade between the nomads and the Russian Empire flourished. However, the Irtysh is one moody river, and it flooded that fort frequently. As a matter of fact, I think it is flooding right now. Just look at all those trees. I don't think there should be any water. So 60 years later, in 1778, the fort was relocated 18 kilometers upstream, where the flood was less likely to rage.
I guess this place is still not that safe from the flood. I don't know.
1 year after the fortress of Semipalatinsk was built, the Russians built another fortress at Lake Zaisan. The Dzungars attacked with 20,000 men, but the Russians held them off this time, leading to a truce. Fighting multiple wars at the same time, Tsavanrabdan could not risk war with Russia. He allowed the construction of the fortress of Ost-Kamnogorsk in return for Russian withdrawal and promises of aid. As the Russian fortresses sprung up like mushrooms along the Irtysh, the Qing fortresses also sprung up like mushrooms deep into the desert. With his position strengthened, Emperor Kangxi sent another expedition of 300,000 soldiers from Xining. This time, they defeated the Dzungars in the Tarim Basin in 1719 and Tibet in 1720, installing the 7th Dalai Lama on the throne. The Dzungars were now sandwiched and faced multiple crises. Their artillery was running low, their cattle were dying of disease, their morale was at rock bottom, and the winter was coming. At the 11th hour, the last Russian mission arrived. This time, Tsavanrabdan was seriously considering an alliance with the Russians against the Qing Empire. However, as the negotiation was going on December 20th, 1722, Emperor Kangxi died. And that changed everything. Shortly after, the new Emperor Yunzheng sent peace treaties. Tsavanrabdan felt that he was no longer in danger and took a harder position against Russia. Peace with the Qing Empire greatly relieved the Dzungars, allowing them to resume their attacks on the Kazakhs. In the spring of 1723, the Dzungars marched west and crushed the Kazakhs. It is believed that about 1/3 of the entire Kazakh population was lost this time. The remaining Kazakhs scattered north, south, and west in what came to be called a barefooted flight. Some tribes of the Middle Horde fled north to Tobolsk, others stormed south into Transoxiana, bringing chaos to the Uzbeks and the Tajiks that nearly collapsed the Khanate of Bukhara. Tribes of the Senior Horde retreated to the Fergana Valley, crossing into Kujan, bringing chaos to the newly founded Khanate of Kokand. Tribes of the Junior Horde fled along the rivers to the Russian borders, bringing chaos to the Kalmyk Khanate. The Kalmyks were so concerned that they decided to submit to the Russians. The Dzungars, however, entered a period of peace. 3 years after Emperor Kangxi died in 1725, Tsar Peter the Great died, giving the Dzungars another much-needed break. 2 years later, in 1727, the Dzungar Khan, Tsavanrabdan, died. He was remembered as a fighter. In the face of two superpowers led by two of the most powerful leaders in human history, Tsavanrabdan did not back down and submit as a vassal. Instead, he revived the Dzungar Khanate and greatly expanded its territory. Yet, he would be the last Dzungar Khan to achieve such a feat. The world was changing rapidly. Since the mid-15th century, the Europeans had entered the age of discovery and developed sea routes that completely bypassed the heartlands of Eurasia. The East, on the other hand, prospered and became the most populated region on Earth. Trade between the two ends of Eurasia generated unimaginable wealth. Meanwhile, far from the ocean and disconnected from the outside world, the Silk Road was forgotten and transformed into something entirely different.